Nikolai Ovshinnikov and I went together to Moscow. Both of us were to study marine science at the same school. There were 20 of our guys in one carriage, and almost the whole way we sang. Amazing power in a peon. Even people who previously did not know each other, they bring together. Relationships become simpler and more cordial. Sadness dissipates. When the train rolled up to the platform of the Moscow station, we said goodbye to our fellow travelers as old friends. Nikolai and I lived not far from each other in Moscow. He on the corner of Arbat Square, IS, at Nikitsky Gate. Therefore, having agreed with the guys about tomorrow's meeting at the commandant of the city, together with Nikolai squeezed into the car of the 5th number of the streetcar and rode away to Arbat Square with its still cobblestone then sidewalk. In the morning, we went to the Kamovnikesky District Komsomol Committee. When they began to talk about our trek around Scandinavia, the people in the room filled to capacity. For 2 hours, we talked and answered countless questions, and it was not just a conversation, a story about entertaining, but a real report of Komsomol members to their organization. Such a custom later became an inviolable rule. I think it is certainly useful in all respects to observe such rules and in the present time. Komsomolet should always feel his responsibility for the organization entrusted to him. "Well done, guys. You did not fail," said to us the secretary of the district committee. "Everything that you told us today is very interesting. It's about the campaign, about everything you saw, about the attitude of Norwegian workers, about their life, about your sea service should be told to union and non-union youth. We will use your vacation with good use. We will send it to the Komsomol organizations of the district." And so almost every day we appeared together or apart in various Komsomol organizations, told about the fleet affairs mainly, of course, about the first foreign campaign of the Red Fleet ships. One day Nikolai came running to me. "Volodka, have you heard? They broadcast on the radio, there's a flood in Leningrad." What do we do? We went to the commandant's office to deregister and took the first train to Leningrad. We came to the officer on duty at the Moscow commandant's office, handed over our documents and asked to leave. "Why are you leaving so early? You can still walk around for a week." "There's a flood in Leningrad. That's why we're in a hurry." "Are you two conspiring or what? 12 sailors have been here before you, and they're all rushing to the flood. You sailors are a cooperative, friendly people. Get your papers. Take these notes. They say that the railroad commandant will send you by the first train." Thanking them, they left. We quickly got by streetcar to Smolenskaya Square, from which the Kamovnichesky District Committee was a short walk away. We explained the reason for our departure. Having received approval and a wish of success in maritime affairs, we ran home to get our things and went to the station. We arrived in Leningrad when the big water had already gone. We took a streetcar along Nevsky and didn't recognize the avenue. All the wooden end sidewalk, which Leningraders were so proud of, was completely washed away. Only single hexagonal checkers stick out somewhere. On Moskaya Street, as well as on other streets, the sidewalk is gone, but there is plenty of mud. In the streets near some houses, fire engines pump water out of cellars. On the houses of Nevsky, the flood left its marks at a height of more than a meter, and in the areas adjacent to the Neva, especially on Vasilievsky Island, and even higher. On the right bank of the Neva, near the bridge of Lieutenant Schmidt, a barge was thrown ashore by the flood. Cellars, many stores and warehouses were flooded. In some places where the water made great mischief, numerous groups of workers, students, Red Army and Red Fleet men worked. On the embankment of Vasilievsky Island, in some places, the cobblestone sidewalk was washed away. With excitement, we approached the front entrance of a huge building with a tower for observing the luminaries and a signal mast. Is there something ahead of us? How will things go? Trying to cope with anxious thoughts, we enter the Temple of Marine Science. We went to the school duty officer, reported properly, handed in our orders. Messenger, carry the arrived cadets in the transition company for sanitary treatment. In the company on duty led to a dormitory with beautiful iron beds. Make yourselves comfortable. Take the free bunks for now. When the whole course will be gathered, settle down by platoon. In half an hour in the battery room you will get new uniforms, which you will put in the wardroom, and soap and other small things, as well as books, you will hide in the offices. Is that clear? I'm not sure what a cubicle is. They're study tables with beveled tops. Understand? Let's go. In the bedroom, we each chose a bed. Nikolai and I were next to each other, peering in across two bunks. In the preparatory room, we slept on bunks stuffed with shavings, at best with straw. Here we had real hair mattresses, bunks with spring nets. If you lie down in a cradle, you don't want to get up. Each bunk has a stool with a white canvas shirt. Why do we need shirts when we wear stripes? We'll see. In due time, we received all the equipment, placed it as the duty officer indicated to us. Besides us in the company room were about 30 newcomers. Most of them arrived on Komsomol vouchers, passed competitive exams. Some of the guys from Leningrad and suburbs applied directly to the school. They also passed competitive exams. The new recruits, who had not yet undergone formation training, looked like the usual angular and slow-moving recruits. In the smoking room, a kind of company club, went questions. Who is from where? Our brother, of course, trumped up the naval vocabulary. A foreign campaign gave out a mountain of stories and tall tales. Bergen turned out to be an unrivaled master here, too. Even we admired him. Friendly laughter was his well-deserved reward. When the signal for lunch sounded, we formed two lines. We walked along the corridor, on the walls of which hung wooden carved images of strange animals, then wide, light, past the huge, beautiful paintings of sea battles. It's so interesting. You can't take your eyes off it. You keep in line. You will still have time to look at the paintings. Mie comes the voice of the duty officer. The corridor is long and long. As we found out later, it was called an art gallery. From the corridor we entered a magnificent hall with large windows, massive chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, with walls decorated with marine heraldry, with a beautiful parquet floor, with choirs placed along the entrance wall. At the end of the hall in the left corner stood a sailing brig with its masts almost touching the ceiling. It was astonishing. The largest hall in Leningrad was named the Hall of Revolution after Vladimir Lenin spoke in it. When we were told that the ceiling of the hall hung on chains, we did not believe it. Sobol and Kotayev by some miracle managed to get into the attic and see for themselves. Yes, although it is incredible, but the ceiling hangs on chains. Long dining tables were arranged in the hall. Besides us, who were the last to arrive, there were cadets of other courses standing at the tables. The command followed, sit down. No sooner had we finished our first meal than we were served cutlets with fragrant buckwheat porridge. Even in the preparatory school, where the food was good, we had never had cutlets. Stunning. On the tables, bread bowls, gorchichitesa. All day long our amazement was unending. The evening inspection is done. Bedtime. I found a big sheet under the pillow. I guessed it was a duvet cover. We'd never known duvet covers before. I snuggled up and dozed off. Suddenly I felt someone shaking me lightly by the shoulder. Miss, cadet, get up. I opened my eyes in a flash. It turns out that the duty officer woke me up. What does he want? To take off my vest, put on a nightgown. What nightgown? The one on the bedside stool. You're supposed to sleep without underpants. I put on the shirt. It was cut from top to bottom, buttoned up, and the length was up to my knees. It was strange, unusual to be dressed like that, but by morning we were all convinced of its convenience and hygiene. We loved our preparatory school with a devoted youthful love, and it was sad to part with it, with father dear to our heart. That's why we treated everything we met in the new school pickily, with some jealous feeling. But we had a lot of impressions, and all in favour of the new one. I liked it, liked the school by all accounts, and its history turned out to be wonderful. It started from the first Russian navigational school, created by Peter and formerly located in Moscow in the Sakharev Tower. All those enrolled in the first course moved in. Most of them were Preparelevites. They became the initiators in all affairs, in all educational and party and Komsomol work. Junior command staff in the companies were appointed from senior courses. The foreman of our company was Baturin, who graduated from the school in 1925. Strict and exacting, he quickly took everyone in hand. Some cadets were even afraid of his menacing look and shout. Our platoon commander was a good-natured looking, but in fact also quite tough cadet Oxman. We were assigned to classes, preserving the collectives that had been formed in preparatory training. Naturally, it was a great joy for us. Thus, in each class the corps were cadets who had graduated from the preparatory school, participants of the Komsomolets trip. The main subjects in the first year were political training, higher mathematics, theoretical mechanics, astronomy, navigation, ship design, and naval history. To check our mathematical preparation, On the one hand and on the other, to restore our knowledge in secondary mathematics, 2 weeks too forced us to solve the trickiest problems in algebra, geometry, and especially in trigonometry. We had to work hard. We were given a lot of problems and not enough time to solve them. We were taught to work at the same pace as navigators, artillerymen, and minesweepers. Time passed. Gradually, we became more confidently oriented in the labyrinth of marine sciences. We were drawn into the necessary rhythm of work. In the first course, it was necessary to get general maritime training, good training in higher mathematics, political disciplines, to get an idea of the basics of navigation and astronomy. In training, a lot of attention was paid to sports, mainly swimming, boxing, fencing, and gymnastics. Some sciences were given to many with great difficulty, especially higher mathematics, and if we comprehended it, we owed it to such wonderful teachers as R.A. Kolodetsky, who presented us his subject so enthusiastically, so beautifully, that we were engaged in classes with excitement until bedtime. Soon our handwritten, lithographically published by the school's forces textbook on higher mathematics received a somewhat ironic unofficial name: Holodetsky's Funny Stories. Alas, these stories required a lot of time, even at the expense of shore leave. Theoretical mechanics in our class was read by N.E. Rostoptsev, a former pupil of the Naval Corps who worked as an engineer at the Obukhov factory, a naval artilleryman. He read brilliantly. It was impossible not to know thermomechanics from him. By his own, immediately. At the class, compiled tasks based on everyday examples of mechanics and building structures. He skillfully ignited in us an interest in his science. I was infected with theoretical mechanics. It was given to me easily, much easier than Heavenly or the same merry stories Kolodetsky. Les Goronsky stood out among the teachers, not only as an excellent mathematician, but also as a very interesting person. No one took offense at his jokes and sometimes even ridicule. Everyone knew how sincerely he wanted to give the cadets as much necessary knowledge as possible, how unselfish his work was and how sacred was his loyalty to his goddess, mathematics. Many people came to him for advice and help. There was no refusal to anyone. This man with disheveled hair and a chalky suit had the talent of a great storyteller, poetic soul, was full of goodwill, although inexorably strict in his requirements and assessments of knowledge of cadets. The Office of Naval History was located between the museum of the school and the Hall of Revolution. We soon fell in love with this subject too. We tried to get answers to many questions that worried us in the lectures of the teacher, who could surprisingly quickly find contact with the young audience. Since the naval school was located on Vasilevsky Island, it became somewhat difficult to maintain our old ties with the Komsomol members of the Central District and new ones with the working youth of the Vasilevsky District had not yet been established. The Komsomol Bureau of the school decided to attach all Komsomol members of the first year to the Komsomol organizations of factories and plants and to oblige them to take the most active part in all their work. As a rule, our Komsomol members were included in the bureaus of production teams, so the connection with shipbuilding plants, textile, confectionery, tobacco, and other factories was established. Our choirmaster Sasha Sagatyev at the factory named after Vera Slutskaya helped the factory amateur performance, led the choir circle. I was attached to the candy and chocolate factory named after Concordia Samoylova. The decision to attach the Komsomol members of our course to the factory Komsomol organizations was very wise. Communicating with young workers, we acquired a certain hardening, and this is the main thing. Now, when leaving the shore, the cadets hurried not to the dances, but to the new working collectives. We, to Sings, to the drama club, to the editorial board of the Wall newspaper, to the string orchestra. Close contacts with Leningrad boys and girls were established. In a few months, the school began to become famous among the working youth, and that's when the idea was born, to organize an evening of interlocking with the Komsomol members of the city of Lenin. We formed a committee. There were 10 of us in it. The evening was planned to be held in the Revolution Hall. Instead of dancing, we decided to organize games, to attract guys from the Institute of Physical Education, in the adjacent company room to arrange attractions with prizes, to open their stalls of everyday life, where everyone could get answers to all the questions related to human relations in everyday life. We decided to invite amateur art groups, choirs, orchestras of all factories and plants with which we had contact. The evening promised to be unusual. Chiefs of the school, students of the Academy of Arts proposed before the beginning of the evening to launch an airplane loaded with cheerful leaflet slogans, excerpts from the verses of famous poets. As it travelled, the airplane was to scatter the leaflets. At the entrance to the hall in its full width, they planned to hang a slogan. "Today everyone is on you and everyone knows each other." Cadet Nemilovsky made an airplane, in the hatch of which was placed more than half a pood of leaflets. When the airplane slid on the wire, the rotation of the propeller wound a sailing thread on the spool, which pulled the latch of the hatch cover, and the leaflets, arranged in a special order, fell out and flew around the hall. The work was boiling. There were plenty of people willing to take part in organising and holding the evening. Everyone considered it an honour to bring some benefit to such a good cause. Suggestions were pouring in from all sides. The last days worked tirelessly. At last everything was ready. The hall was moderately decorated with signal flags and looked solemn. In the company room adjacent to the hall there were rides, prizes, and stalls of everyday life. All the stewards of the evening who were to meet the guests were diligently ironing their navy cleche, flanelles, and uniforms. The plaques of their belts had long ago shone with a mirror-like lustre. And so the long-awaited day came. We were extremely nervous, though everyone tried to hide it, but the head gave out all. At the appointed hour, we opened the doors of the hall. Entering guests were greeted by a huge poster. "Today everyone is on you and everyone knows each other." This immediately created an atmosphere of spontaneity. Approving cheers were heard. In a few minutes, the hall was filled with young people, cadets of the school. A light buzz rose to the choirs, usually arising in anticipation of the spectacle and the abundance of already received impressions. Suddenly, as is the plan, the light goes out in the hall. Kettler's voice, the loudspeaker, is heard in the darkness. "Everyone, all members of the Komsomol, today everyone is on you and everyone knows each other." At the last words, the three of us, Nemilovsky, Kettler and I, forcefully pushed the airplane hanging on the wire, illuminated by a spotlight on the choir. There is applause in the hall. Our airplane rolls down quite merrily, and WEUCE. Oh horror! The hatch does not open, the wire sags threateningly, and the airplane, having flown almost over the heads of the audience, hangs helplessly at the lowest point of the sagging wire. There is a cheerful murmur in the hall. We in despair hastily scatter the remaining leaflet slogans from the choirs, and Kettler, not confused, loudly reads through a megaphone their content. This is met with cheerful laughter. Someone from the audience reached the hatch cover on the airplane, and from there a multi-kilogram pile of leaflets fell on everyone's heads. The lights are on. There is deafening laughter in the hall. You can hear the shouts. "Brothers, let's help the aircraft designers. Hand out leaflets." From shame, we were ready to fall into Tartarus. When the airplane suddenly began to stumble back to the choir, there was no end to the fun and jokes. The incident with the airplane cheered up all the guests in one way or another. The noise orchestra of the school appeared on the bandstand. The orchestrators were dressed as corsairs of the sailing fleet era and armed with rattling equipment. Pots, horns, trays, squeakers whistling at different voices. A double bass consisting only of a front deck and stretched hemp rope. Here the audience was absolutely delighted. Laughter and jubilation was caused by the mere appearance on the stage of the ballet Miracle couple. She, a senior cadet barbarian, a huge man with the face of Ali Baba and angel's curls. He, a second-year cadet Bazyunov, half the height, not at all brilliant physique. When this pair with imperturbable frozen faces began to make choreographic pass, in the hall began an incredible laughter. The performance made a sensation. Only after that we had a little relief from the heart, and we realized that the evening was still successful. Games in the hall alternated with amateur performances on the stage. Everyone felt at ease. In their own environment, everyone was having fun. But here comes one of the cadets of the 3rd platoon and excitedly report. Nikomisa Rashevich is looking for Ryazanova, Maresa Nova to close the evening. The time is past midnight. There are more than 2,000 guests in the hall. The fun is in full swing. How can you expel them all at once? But Rashevich had a stubborn temper. He ordered the school duty officer to close the evening. He did so without explaining anything to the guests. We were all very worried about what had happened. However, all wounds heal. Minor wounds heal quickly. Serious ones take a long time. This one did too. It took a few months, though. By that time, Rashevich was replaced by a remarkable Bolshevik, a man of fine mental qualities, Yakov Volkov. Later it turned out that Ovchinnikov, who was responsible for stowing leaflets in the airplane, overdid it. He stuffed the hatch to capacity. Under the excessive weight of the hatch latch jammed, and the force of the propeller was not enough to overcome the many kilograms of pressure. Nikolai's sincere repentance could not fix anything. The days of study stretched in succession, bringing joys and sorrows. We were already confidently dealing with integrals and differentials. Kolodetsky was pleased with us, but to maintain the proper mathematical tone he gave us more and more difficult problems. Some clearly excelled in the art of solving mathematical puzzles and gave this hobby even evening hours. Others, especially those who were attached to factories where female staff predominated, suddenly discovered a talent for singing or drama and often spent their evenings in the factory clubs. I had to divide my love between the sweetest factory named after Concordia Samoilova and the wall newspaper of the school, in the editorial board of which, as well as in the preparatory school, I was a member performing a party assignment. And then there is a passion for navigating. Shanae Sakalari, the navigational god, initiated us into the mysteries of navigational sciences. A man who has not mastered navigation, neglecting the lotiaya, not owning all the methods of ship navigation, can never become a real, highly cultured, educated naval commander. A. Sakalari insinuated us. I will say more. Subject in ship navigation, and navigation is dangerous at sea. Dangerous for oncoming ships, for the ship on which he is serving, for the fleet gunner, torpedo operator, minor watch commander, not to mention the chief mate and commander of the ship, without knowledge of navigational business will not be able to solve any combat task at sea, will not be able to achieve combat success. After Sakalari's lectures, the auditorium and corridors were buzzing. They made a strong impression. Hot debates were going on, not only about what was so simple, bright and deep in content taught to us, but also about the very essence of the commander's duty, about the qualification of the commander, about its daily check at sea. From the very first lecture of Sakalari, we listened to everything that related to the navigational business with the greatest attention, eagerly absorbing the laws, requirements, subtleties of the science, the importance of which was revealed to us. We mastered the navigational methods of determining the ship's position at sea quite easily, although compass corrections applied with the wrong sign, and especially declinations, which had to be taken from the sea chart, often led to curiosities. But the main difficulties began when we had to use charts and logs, which were published by the British Admiralty. Naturally, all inscriptions and text in them were in English. This alone made it very difficult for us to use them. Especially annoying were conditional and abbreviated designations. That's when the whole class regretted that we were studying French instead of English, which was absolutely useless for navigation classes. This explained our more than cool attitude to French lessons. Only later, when we became commanders, did we realize that we had lost a lot by not learning at least French properly. Not to mention English, but alas, you can't get back the lost time. Now we had English maps on the desks in front of us, and we were literally sweating over them. It's not easy, navigational science. Oh, it's not easy. It was with great difficulty that we mastered those unfortunate charts. We learned to read them like first-year schoolboys, by folds. It was clearer than clear to us. If you can't be a real commander without navigational science, you can't become a real commander without navigational sciences. Now it was no longer higher mathematics that we studied in classrooms in the evenings, but navigation. We worked on charts and logs. We ran for help to those cadets who were studying English. We didn't notice how in our classes the subjects that make up the science of navigation gradually came to the forefront. One day it came to practical classes on navigational guidance. We didn't get it right at first, but gradually we mastered it too. And by the end of spring we were able to manage Sakalari's tasks quite. It was necessary to pass on the Aurora navigational practice, not to disgrace ourselves. On the cruiser and ashore. Despite the temptations and charm of the white nights, the course exams are passed. In a few days all the courses will go for summer practice on the fleet's warships. First-year students will be practicing on the cruiser Aurora. During the foreign campaign in 1924, we on the dinghy Komsomolets have been on board of the cruiser more than once, but to get on the ship itself, at least on the upper deck, happiness did not fall out. Now the dream was coming true. Aquarius, no. One is moored to the side of the Aurora. We step on the upper wooden deck, sanded to whiteness. In memory, as if covered with a haze, seeing off in Leningrad, where, as if on an unknown signal to us, On the wall of the embankment gathered girls from the shipbuilding and other plants, from factories, erased in the memory of the features of their lovely faces, the sadness of parting full of eyes. Everything is overshadowed by the cruiser. Chains the navigators' tables, boxes with navigators' aids and tools. Our personal belongings, as well as huge knots with clean linen and uniforms, were overloaded onto the ship. Not a bad sign. Obviously, we would not have to do laundry. Everything brought is stacked on deck. We're in formation. On the right flank of the course, Chief P.A. Kozridnikov, Teacher A. Gedrimovich, providing navigational practice, and Laboratory Assistant Chief Petty Officer Nikanor Ignatievich Sarayaninov, whom we have firmly loved for care, for help in wandering through the navigational wilderness, and a truly fatherly attitude to the entire cadet fraternity. The watch commander gives the command attention. On the deck, a large build with a strong-willed chin, stern, dark eyes, Senior Assistant Commander A. F. Lear. Everyone understood. No mercy and indulgence from such an exo-wick or something stronger will be grabbed in no time. Having said hello, the exo announces. The cadets in the middle part of the ship are assigned one cubicle on each side. Rendukes 1 for 2. Bunk nets are side by side on the upper deck above the cubicles. Suspended bunks, cork mattresses to be obtained in the battalion. All cadets will be assigned places and responsibilities for combat, emergency and fire alarms. You'll serve on an equal footing with the cruiser's crew. I'd like the course director to come to my quarters. Immediately, as if waiting for the XO to finish speaking, the cruiser commander L.A. Polenov appeared on the upper deck. Taut, austere, with a slightly freckled face and a keen, almost eagle-eyed look of grey, as if a little faded eyes, he immediately came to our liking. He wore a tunic and a well-tailored navy cloak. As we learned later, he did not recognize other pants, and instead of an undershirt, he wore a tunic. If such on the sea will not be lost, and under his gaze cannot say the truth. Looks as if through shines through. I am glad to welcome the cadets of my native school on board the cruiser. The service will not be easy. Work with diligence. As future commanders, be an example in everything. I hope that we will be satisfied with each other. After our arrival on the cruiser, it became clearly crowded. Cubicles, lockers, everything was designed for the staff, and we, in addition, came in overstaffed. In addition to the half bank, we were given charge of the entire starboard side of the upper deck, all the starboard davits with lifting devices, the outer side of the ship's hull and superstructure, as well as the most sacred place on the upper deck, the bunks under which the wardroom and crew quarters are located. Besides, we had to supervise the cabins where the cadets lived and the artillery gun. In a word, except for the lower rooms, machinery and boilers, almost half of the ship had to be tended by the hands of marine students, as the ship's witters called us. The first cleaning showed that an unspoken competition had begun between the crew and us. We had to prove our suitability for sea service by our labor, to prove that we were not shoddy and any work we could do. As in the preparatory school, here on the Aurora, we liked to amuse our souls with song. After dinner, we would gather on the tank, and a song and a dance would arise by itself. If we would sing a dance, Kosmip and Polenishko would come out into the circle. It's a sight to behold. Their legs were walking on their own. Both to the choir and the dancers, as a rule, were joined by the crew's redcoats. Gradually the choir expanded and friendship with the crew became closer and closer. The song is especially good on the roadstead in the pre-dusk hours. The sea is like a mirror. The air does not even rub the pennant braids. That's when it is so sung. So often under the guidance of the school laboratory assistants bosuns, Gritsyuk and Vasiliev were training in rowing and sailing. The chief petty officers, great masters of their craft, spared neither their own nor the cadets' strength, spent hours driving us around so that, as Gritsyuk put it, everything was just right, so that the sea was sizzling under the oars. Tomorrow is scheduled for a dinghy drill and a run. The whole crew will participate. We will have to compete with the commodores, each of whom is almost of guard's height, and with the stokers who are not offended by the strength. It's going to be a tough job. Jimmy got up before wake-up. Once again, before launching, they checked the dinghies. And Karin, a senior teacher of marine science at the school, went as the chief on the barge, on which the rowers were the tallest guys of the first platoon. On our rowing boat, the chief was appointed Gritsyuk, foreman helmsman, Volkov, rowing Karateyev, Penshugin, Tank, Yukhanov, and me. The other 10 men were also from our class. Well, eagles do not hit the dirt, calls us Gritsyuk, rowing slowly. rowing to make up the oars bend, fall off as we were taught, almost lying on our backs. Watch the oars are like wings. Now it's all about the strength and cleanliness of the stroke. The boat is running smoothly. The water is talking under the bow. We row harmoniously, strongly, smoothly, beautifully round the stern of the cruiser, on the youth of which stands, armed with binoculars, Commander Polenov. He looks attentively, says something to the XO. The latter takes a megaphone, and we hear from the mouth of Lear himself. On the 11th, good rowing. Gritsyuk is pleased. Our faces shine. We entered the rhythm, and from the commander's praise boat ran even faster. More cheerfully and cheerfully rumbled the sea-water cut by the stem. The run under the oars ended in an exciting sporting struggle. Karin's barkaz was the first. We, having taken out the boat of the commander's, went with him for a long time AR to oar, but at the finish we lagged behind by 2 meters. The rest of the cadets' dinghais did not go further than the 6th place. It was a victory. In the eyes of the crew we gained respect as rowers. The stokers' and radio operators' quarters, despite the overcrowding, were not compacted. But in other living quarters, especially in cadets' cabins, there were as many people as in an anthill of. They slept on the lockers, on suspended bunks in 2 tiers, on the deck, leaving a barely noticeable path for passage along the sides. And still they could not fit in. We settled wherever and however we could. Our invariable trio of Chinikov, Perigin and I settled down in the command staff corridor. In these conditions it was extremely difficult to find a working shift coming on watch at night, and yet the service was carried out properly. Everyone was searched for. Every day in the morning and evening the command was given out. All hands to hoist rowing boats. The crew and cadets rushed to the upper deck and lined up on the sides. Nurtiajud your hands. Lear commanded in a loud voice in a megaphone, walking along the longitudinal bridge connecting the middle superstructure of the ship with the aft one. Go, Thally! We stomped diligently across the deck. There were no mechanical means of lifting cargo on the ship. Even the anchor, the spire raised out of the water, was manually, by lines set vertically and fastened to the outer side of the cruiser. The multi-ton steamboat, much heavier than the anchor, was also lifted by line, by hand. The boat was beautiful, with a bright, light copper pipe, but we did not like to lift it. This exercise required great physical strength. On the cruiser, we not only familiarized ourselves with the artillery installations, took part in the maintenance of the guns, but also trained as gunners on the Krylov device. When the ship held Commodore bullet firing, together with the commanders as gunners on the bucket-fired and cadets, bucket was a piece of boiler iron bent into a tube and hung on the cross of a small raft, which was towed a few dozen meters along the side of the ship's steamboat or rowing barge. The gunner aimed the gun, on which the barrel of an ordinary rifle was fixed on top, set the gunner's command fire. The locksmith would pull a cord attached to the rifle's trigger. If the bullet hit the shield bucket, a resounding click was heard. Each gunner fired 10 shots. Before the first firing, we only talked about them. And how could it be otherwise if for the first time each of us was to aim at a sea target by himself, to fire a ship's gun for the first time in his life? In the evening, Alia Frolov announced the list of those whom Karin had appointed to the crew of the barracks for bringing in the stern anchor. I was among them as a tank rower. We were worried. What about shooting? However, we were immediately assured that the Barkazniki would shoot after a little rest. In the morning, those who were appointed rowers got up before wake-up and rushed to the stern of the ship, where a barcade was fixed on the buckboard. 2 big, strong, orderly Red Fleet men were working on the wooden planks, the ends of which stuck out more than a meter beyond the stern of the barge. The masts and sails and water anchors were removed from the barge. At the right time, everyone assembled on the barkhouse. The stern of the barkhouse should be under the beam, on which hangs a huge anchor. It is lowered from the ship so that it could be fastened to the beam with its legs down. Now where the rudder of the barcade is, the anchor hangs astern. In the space between the rowers we lay a thick tarred rope. Purlin, one end of which is on the cruiser and the other on the barge. On this purlin and hangs the anchor. That's it, that commands Karin. Oars on the water. Don't spare your strength, otherwise we'll sink till the evening. Barkaz turns nose to wind. At first, while the purlin was being poisoned from the cruiser, the barkaz was moving. But the farther we went away from the cruiser, the longer the cables sinking in the water became, the slower the barkaz was moving, despite all our effort, and then it stopped altogether. We began to drift into the wind. The cruiser commanded us to row more into the wind. We rowed as hard as we could. The sweat pants have long been soaked with sweat. Sweat is running from our faces not in drops but in rivulets, and the matter is moving tightly. Soon the third hour of rowing will be over. Suddenly some signal on Aurora. Corinne commands. Troopers, row to the purlin. Stand up, row as fast as you can. Gritsyuk, Vasiliev, get ready. The chief petty officers raised their axes and stood on the sides of the stern bank. Barkaz, having got some freedom, went far and chopped the anchorage. Juk and Vasiliev cut the anchorage with a precise blow of their axes like a razor, and the anchor finally plunged into the water. As a sign that the task was accomplished, the barkeep put the stern flag on the dinghy. We rowed as before, and the lightened barcars ran like your fast sailboat. When we beautifully approached the cruiser's gangway and instantly executed the command Sabbath, laying the heirs on board, Karin could not stand it. And you are my young men, you'll be useful. We could hardly reach the cabin and lay down on the gunwales. When we were already eating delicious lunch, the cruiser was turned with the help of the brought anchor with the side to the wind. After the lunch break, bullet shooting began, which lasted until late afternoon, and the next day too. The boys shot well, especially Romanovsky. Afinogenov, Katkov and Osiko distinguished themselves. They had 10 hits each. I shot badly. I'll start vertical aiming. I can't cope with horizontal. You're not a very good artilleryman, the owner of the gun said dismissively. Your hands are working without any consent, though your head is in place, but you haven't learned how to operate the levers. It's a shame, but it's a fact. I couldn't get it to point in 2 planes at once. Bad luck to Korolev, Kibinsky, Gromov, Hotiev, all of us, grief counsellors, were the subject of jokes and pranks. On the loading station, which consisted of a cut gun breech block with a lock and a shell tray, the gun servants spent hours practicing loading, practicing with 30-kilogram shells. We practiced too, though artillery is a formidable weapon, but it did not captivate my soul. Day after day there were training and combat alarms, artillery drills to fight for the survivability of the ship. Everything spun like in a wheel, just have time to turn. Loading coal, carrying on watch in the engine room at the steam boilers, on the signal bridge, at the helm of the rudder alternated with each other, studying the Baltic Sea logs, navigating and navigational plotting crowned our training in navigational sciences. To sail in the Gulf of Finland even in daytime, with good visibility, and then you need to have skill. And at night our guides were confused when they mistakenly bearing the wrong beacons, wrong navigation lights. Unrivaled navigator and educator Jedrimovich, together with our navigator uncle Nikanor Ignatievich Shuryananov, watched us with a watchful eye. It should be emphasized once again that in our upbringing, in our knowledge of marine disciplines, a great role was played by the laboratory technicians, headmasters, former sailors of the Tsarist fleet, excellent masters of their craft, excellent specialists and educators. We owed our knowledge of marine sciences, artillery, torpedoes, mines and navigational disciplines to them, who spared no time and effort for the good of the native fleet, for the education of commanders of high naval qualification. On the cruiser we were tasked to study the ship's structure within 2 weeks. General data, armament, basic ship elements taught us senior watch commander, and sinkability systems, compartments, holds, all sorts of bottoms and pumps, numerous systems of pipelines of steam heating, fresh and overboard water. We learned under the guidance of Chief Petty Officer Hook, a person widely known in the fleet. Krychok served on the Aurora for more than 20 years. No one knew the ship better than him. He was in his 50s. He participated in many overseas campaigns in the pre-revolutionary fleet. He was not only a great master in his work, but also no less masterful storyteller of stories and told tales. Everyone loved to listen to him, to laugh at his tales too. The most mischievous Red Fleet men obeyed him unconditionally. His inquisitive mind was always improving something, inventing something. Back in those years he invented a kick for fire-extinguishing degaussing. It had a tip in the form of a hollow ball with numerous holes, thanks to which water was sprayed, covering a significant area of the fog cap. In the Navy this device was so-called Hook's Kick. Alas, its introduction, as is often the case, took years and years. Hook did not live to see that time. The science under the guidance of this interesting man we passed richly, and his instructions remained in our memory for all. Everyone, from the commander to any sailor, must know his business completely, It is clear, but to know his house ship to the screws. Not everyone understands how it will be useful in battle. And of course, every commander, from small to big, in this matter must show an example. How often I remembered Hook's lessons during the war. Excellent knowledge of his ship, perfect training in the fight for its survivability were among the combat qualities that helped the crews to literally save their ships, to repair in battle such damage that seemed unthinkable to fix. At the end of the summer we were going to sail abroad again, on the last year's route around Scandinavia with a visit to Gothenburg, and on the way back to Bergen. For us cadets, to this campaign the main task is navigational practice and keeping watch on the move, both at the upper posts and in the engine room, as well as at the steam boilers. At the school we received new equipment, nautical charts and other navigational aids and tools necessary for the campaign. Bankovsky, who was in charge of the whole economy and finances of the school, usually could not ask for a penny, but here, equipping us for a foreign voyage, he was generous. I, as the editor of the wall newspaper Storm, received a fairly decent amount of money, on which we, together with one of the artists of the editorial board, Michael Romanoff, bought paper and coloured ink, and most importantly, Michael somewhere got a large set of honey watercolour paints. With such armament and with artistic talents, Obukov, Solovyov, Romanoff and Bryandinsky could hope that the paper would have a proper appearance. The chief of the course promised to help us make slogans and greetings in Swedish. Obukov gravitated to easel painting, beautifully painted watercolours, sea, ships. Solovyov, in his own style, made original vignettes, headpieces. Romanov tended to graphics. Bryandinsky drew excellent caricatures. Afinogenov and Sergei Rabinovich were avid war correspondents, could type with one finger on a typewriter and confidently bring it to an absolutely unusable state. We were given strict orders. Blood from the nose, but the newspaper 3 meters in size, attractive, interesting, such that no one, including the guests of the Swedes, did not pass by, must be ready in time for the arrival in Gothenburg. Usually the editorial board of the cruiser newspaper, which was joined by the wall newspaper fraternity of our school, worked in the former ship's church, or rather in the altar of the church, a room with an area of 1.5 meters by 4, separated from the communal cubicle by massive sliding screens of mahogany. To top it all off, 2 large diameter exhaust ventilation pipes ran through the former altar. With the screens closed, the temperature in the room was almost like a steam bath. Though we worked naked from the waist down, the sweat was pouring off us. The ship had already passed Gotland, and the editorial board was relieved from all watches. We worked tirelessly and only came out of our room when we needed it or to eat, or even to get a little fresh air. In Tetsandens, it was past midnight. In the morning we should be on the approach to the port of Gothenburg. Only at 3 a.m. we finished the paper. It is all painted with ink. Drawings and headings are made by the famous honey watercolours, so thick that each letter is palpable with a finger. In what we were, we went to bed under the tables, on which lay our brainchild covered with old newspapers. In the incredible stuffiness, all wet with sweat, I woke up. Strange, I couldn't hear the ship breathing. The turbo dynamo was working only 1, so the cruiser is already at anchor in Gothenburg. So we overslept, the newspaper was not hung out. Above my head, on the tables where the newspaper is lying, some rustling, I jumped up anxiously. Everything on the tables was in place, but the rustling was even more audible, and it was under the old newspapers. I pick up one of them, and, oh horror, an untold number of large cockroaches are literally gnawing away at our honey-coloured paint. All the headlines have turned rippled and almost lost their colour. I'm pulling down the newspaper sheets, chasing away the filth. Guys half-assed. Cockroaches ate the newspaper. The newspaper men jumped up and were stunned. The written in ink remained intact, and from the one written in honey colours, only a pale trace in pockmarks a catastrophe. Stunned by what they saw, the guys can't utter a word. The mission is blown. It is necessary to report that 7 healthy guys have cockroaches literally under their noses ate the wall newspaper. Stupid. The recognized philosopher Solovyov, and in the circle of friends Solovychik, sighed, meaningfully said, yes, and suggested going up to the upper deck. We waddled gloomily upstairs. The ship is silent, the crew is asleep. You can't understand anything, you can't see any city. The cruiser is anchored together with Komsomolets in the sea, not far from some floating receiving lighthouse. Guys, we're lucky we haven't arrived in Gothenburg yet, so we have time to fix the cockroach holes and make the wall newspaper look good, shouts Afinogenov excitedly. Having swallowed a lot of wonderful sea air, we dive down. There's one question, says Rabinovich thoughtfully, raising a hand armed with a brush. What smart guy covered our child with old newspapers and turned off the light? I did both the first and the second. Volodka, and the editor, Sergei laments. You have to know cockroach behavior. Darkness is the best time for their robbery. Stop. Ubukov intervenes. Everything is not his fault, but the one who bought and brought these unfortunate honey paints. Now Mikhail Romanov was repenting. They started to work again. They restored the inscriptions with ink. The matter was moving swiftly. The newspaper was finished before we left the anchor, and before coming to the port we had time to have a bath, to make ourselves look properly, to change clothes. At the approach to the fire leading to the port, Aurora exchanged salute of nations with the coastal battery. For more than an hour our detachment marched along this fjord. On its shores we could see cosy houses, some plants, factories. The closer to the port, the more densely populated the shores and busier on the waterway of Gothenburg. At last the port itself with numerous berths appeared. Transports of different countries were parked there. The pilot boat showed us the barrels on which we should stand, having fastened the fore and aft moorings so that standing on the roadstead would not interfere with the busy traffic. Putting on 2 barrels the ships performed perfectly. In a few minutes, official ceremonies and mutual visits of officials began. During our stay here the heat was more than 30 degrees, although we were wearing only uniforms, but they, especially when carrying watch, quickly got wet with sweat. From the first day we started to go ashore. Our brass band performed in Queen's Park. We had a group of men going on shore leave. Armed with a dictionary, we decided to explore the city. We especially liked the boulevard stretching through the whole Gothenburg, a wide park with shady alleys. We walked along the boulevard. It was shady after all. Soon we came upon some place with small boxes reminiscent of a cafe. Visitors there sat at tables with whole families, ate something, drinking apparently water from fogged glass jugs. We entered the place leisurely. We booked 1 box, having taken 2 chairs from the neighbouring one. No sooner had we settled down than a pretty blonde lady with eyes of heavenly purity and a flirtatious apron approached us. Russian, pointing her finger at us, said the girl. Russian, we confirmed in unison. With a flutter, Freakin disappeared. Not 2 minutes later, as from the door in which she disappeared, a flock of girls, and 3 of them, armed with trays, brought 3 pitchers of water, 3 plates of ice, 3 lemons cut in half, a vase with powdered sugar, 3 spoons and 3 juices. That they were juices, however, we did not immediately guess. Bergen, as always, helped us. Having chirped something, the girls arranged everything they had brought on the table, put a glass like a glass in front of each of them, and gracefully went to the door, leaving the menu on the table. The whole flock of girls, looking at us with curiosity, were discussing something with interest. Having drained, not hurriedly, with due solidity and taste, a glass of life-giving, cool, sweet and sour moisture, we decided that it was time to leave. The same blue-eyed lady came to our table and put a note with numbers in front of Bergen, considering him the eldest in our company. Vladimir took some coins out of his purse and paid. The blue-eyed woman, having chirped in Swedish, apparently, words of gratitude, suddenly with the most friendly smile, Kamraden D, walk please. No translation was needed. The girls crowding at the door waved to us in a friendly manner. We were not in debt. From that day on, every time we were dismissed several times a day, we visited the cafe with such hospitable ladies. And after the incident with Babanov, the cafe became very well known among the Aurorians. Everyone frequented it. Our company had established such friendly relations with the staff that whenever we came, the box in which we had sat the first time was still waiting for us with 6 chairs leaning against the table. Such attention was touching. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What happened to Babanov? During the second dismissal, our small group, having had time to swim in the pool, have breakfast in the cafe, went outside and ran into Babanov. His appearance was deplorable. 1 pant leg was torn. His knee and shin were bleeding. His uniform was covered with dust. And in Babanov's hands was a bicycle, the wheels of which had been turned into 2 figure-8s. What happened? It turns out that Babanov rented a bicycle and decided to ride around the city. But at the first intersection he was torpedoed by a car that turned. He flew like a swallow for 10 meters and landed on all points, hitting his head on the sidewalk, Babanov told us. Who knew that they have all the traffic on the left side of the sidewalk? A bunch of us returned to the cafe. The girls' waitresses saw Babanov, shrieked, wailed, and took him away. As Babanov told later, the girls demanded his Navy clash. While he was taking off the clash, the girls, laughing merrily, held a tablecloth in front of him as a drapery, in which they wrapped him. All the abrasions were treated with iodine. I don't know what and how they did it, but in half an hour his uniform became amazingly white. His pants were mended as if they had never been torn. In a word, our Babanov was well groomed. To top it all off, the rental shop laughed at the hapless cyclist and did not demand any compensation for the former bicycle, categorically refusing to take more than the rental fee. Before leaving Gothenburg, we went to our favorite cafe, to our subscribed box to say goodbye. Paying for our treats, we explained as best we could to the lovely ladies that our ships were leaving. We presented them with bouquets of flowers. The faces of the girls became sad, and dewdrops appeared on their eyelashes. Leaving Gothenburg, the squadron went along the Norwegian coast outside territorial waters, but a few miles from the coastline to give the cadets navigational practice. The cadets' navigational tables were located near the aft superstructure of the cruiser. The table was an office with a raised lid, covered from the weather by a small dodger. Inside the table was an electric lamp with a movable metal rotating hood, allowing to reduce the light source to a small slit. This is not the navigator's cabin with its conveniences, and not the table of the watch commander on the bridge, protected by canopies and windbreaker. The cadet navigator's table was blown through, soaked through. In bad weather, it was possible to keep watch only in special polyester clothes. We did not realize then that we were taught and trained in the most difficult conditions to give the necessary Navy hardening. Only the one who will endure, who will not cower, can become a real Navy commander. Indeed, after the summer practice, we were missing someone in our ranks. Probably it's for the best. In the Navy business, people need persistent, strong, persistent, and persistent. The sea doesn't tolerate slackers. Our uncle Nikanor Ignatyevich Shuryanov took care of the cadet navigating posts and provided them with everything they needed. Maps, logs, weights, navigational instruments. Everything was in place, clock and lag counter, in the aft deck house. The place of anchorage was determined precisely by 3 bearing and 2 horizontal angles. The weather was good. Visibility was also good. All capes, lighthouses, navigation marks were visible without binoculars. Skagerrak and Kattegat Straits have a good navigational situation, so the place of the ship here can always be determined quite accurately. Several hours had passed since we had dropped anchor. Gedrimovich is going around the cadets' navigational posts. He came to my table. I have nothing to worry about. The anchorage is determined precisely. The course has not been changed. The lag is counting the distance travelled. Andreev, a considerable amount of time has passed and you have no definitions. Are you sure of your position? I'm sure. Well, confidence is not a bad quality. Try to clarify your place. Not the average cadet one, which you have all jointly discussed, but the real one. Gedrimovich went to a neighbouring table. I went to the compass direction finder. I took the bearing of 2 lighthouses and plotted it on the map. What a thing! The place by bearing differs considerably from the calculated one. I took the bearing again, plotted it. The pattern is the same. What the hell? The 3rd time I take the bearing and lay them on the map? Wrong again. That's strange. If we connect all 3 points of intersecting bearing, the ship's path differs from the course by a few degrees. How is the future navigator doing? Gedrimovich's voice sounds behind me. What are you thinking about? Show me. Why didn't you choose the best way of determination? By 3 bearing? There are only 2 beacons. Where can you get the 3rd one if you can't see it? Where to get it? Can't see it. I assure you, you can get it, but you have to be clever. I think, and I'm convinced, that I have no wit. Seeing that our conversation has gone on long, the guys from the neighbouring tables came over. Still haven't figured out what can be used as a 3rd landmark. I don't know. I doubt it. If you put your mind to it, you'll find not one, but several landmarks. For example, what is the most conspicuous place on the shore? A Darthing Cape, but they are not clearly delineated and merge with the general background. That's right. And what else? What else? 3 peaks deep in the coastline, especially the outermost one, like a good loaf. Magnificent. And what does that suggest? It follows, Mr. Tells, intervened Mikhail Romanov. Look at the map, and if this peak is marked, use it as a reference point. That's commendable. But it is not at all commendable to interrupt your comrade. If you're all gathered at this table, I'll tell you, young people, you should look carefully at the shore, find notable places, not only peaks, but also capes, rocks, edges of islands, separate buildings, trees. It is very interesting. You can find a lot of interesting things if you look with a navigator's eye. I will say more. You should study the coasts in different seasons, at different times of the day and in any weather. And you should know your coast better than your own apartment. All this must be mastered for confident sailing in peacetime and even more so in wartime. Andreev, you need to determine what's causing these problems. While we're watching Romanov's creation, you sort it out and share it with your comrades. Yes, that's what, young men. You are on a campaign to train in navigational matters. So as often as possible, not less than every 30 minutes, determine the location of the ship, analyze, and you will discover the most interesting phenomena. Don't waste time. It's running out of time. Everyone moved to the table where Mikhail Romanov was working. Well, let's see where one of the Romanovs is swimming. Well, that's not bad. We managed to determine 3 bearing, as I just told you. Kudos. But why do you have to rubber stamp an old gasket? It's no good. You connected several observatories with a solid line and indicated that this is the true course. That's a gross error. To put it mildly, you were in a hurry to distinguish yourself and it was an embarrassment. Not good. You've forgotten the navigator's commandment. Write what we observe. What we observe, and what we don't observe, we adjust. You, Sukhanov, inserted a retort. Well, you know, Sukhanov, Russian navigators never had such a thing. Gedrimovich remarked with resentment. Excuse me, I'm not talking about Russian navigators, but about this person with developed cunning. The navigator's watch was coming to an end. Gedrimovich gathered everyone at my table. So, Andreev, tell us the reasons for the inconsistency. Nutter didn't take into account the influence of the current. Yes, could you have taken it into account? Of course, it's written in the log, it's marked on the map, but the values are somewhat different. It's possible that the drift is also influenced by meteorological conditions. Not possible, but exactly influenced. That is why every commander, and especially the navigator, must carefully analyze all the factors affecting the ship in different weather conditions. So, for example, the speed of the ship's turn, the diameter of the circulation, which is very important to take into account when sailing on the reckoning, change not only depending on the position of the rudder, the speed of the course, but also on the wind. Who will master such subtleties? To him, and sailing in the fog at night is not terrible. Please remember that. Now you can change shifts. The machines are working diligently. While the weather is not capricious, our group is moving further and further north of the Atlantic Ocean. On the cruiser, every day, some kind of exercise, day or night. It's the farther north, the shorter and lighter the nights get. That's why it's easier to navigate on deck than inside the ship, where with the portholes closed, there's no light. Try in this pitch darkness to fight for the survivability of the ship, to put supports, shields, switch steam, water lines, repair damage, restore power supply. Try to put a band-aid on a breach or repair damage to an underwater part at least a few feet below the waterline, when it is almost impossible to stand on the deck. Here you need great physical strength, absolute coherence of actions of several dozens of people, the ability to stay on your feet on the deck going away from under your feet or worse, when the usual support for your feet suddenly rises obliquely at an angle of almost 40 degrees. We were taught to try. We were forced to try. We are Komsomol members. We could not but learn. We acquired skill, ability, everything that is called combat prowess. It was more than enough. Everything was done mainly by bread steam, i.e. by hand. At that time on the cruiser, telephone communication was extremely limited. From the bridge, communication was done mainly by intercom. The most flexible and stable communication was by dispatch with verbal or written orders. For 4 hours at a time, the messenger had to run up and down the gangways. Even during the anchorage in Gothenburg, having come from leave in the most excellent spirits, I learned from the watch commander that the day after tomorrow I was to be a messenger. He would not let himself off the hook, and he would not let the messenger off the hook at all. Just when I reported on the fulfillment of an order, he would again say, "Messenger, You'd fly to the call as fast as you could, and so the whole watch. The farther we go to the north, the less often we meet navigational signs on the shore and ships in the sea. 4 o'clock in the morning. Again, navigational watch, i.e. practice in navigational laying. From the previous shift of cadets, the place was taken by the number. Half an hour later, a lighthouse appeared in the visibility. We plunged one of the peaks marked on the map, a cape with a name. The place appeared to be suitable. We analysed the log in English. Congratulations to the future navigators on a great morning and weather. Well, let's see your creations, said Gedrimovich, reappeared near the navigators' tables. We've been on duty for an hour. We haven't managed to create anything yet, answered Kukanov. An hour is a long time, and a military navigator's time is very long. You can do a lot of things in an hour. Besides, time is a treacherous thing. It will run away and you can't catch up, so you should feel it keenly and spend it thriftily. The guards that stood in front of us said that Gedrimovich spent almost the whole watch with them. Now he's come to us. When does he sleep and rest? Kozlovsky whispers to you, Kozlovsky, are very interested in rest. I'll tell you in confidence one navigator's saying, sleep half-eyed at sea, rest on shore. In my opinion, the wisest rule of behaviour for true navigators. By the way, what is this cape we see on the starboard side? Who can tell us how to recognize it? We have already identified it, Vone replied. How did you do it? Every time we made a bearing, we took the fourth bearing, bearing an unknown cape. 3 such determinations, and everything became clear. Here is this cape. Hirvonen showed the meter on the map. Excellent, I praise your inquisitiveness. That's exactly what we should do. I'm sure you'll be a navigator worthy of the fleet. Sasha Hirvonen really became a navigator later, and to his honour, an excellent navigator. It was not in vain that Gedrimovich's keen eye recognized him. I can't deny I'm beginning to like you. The navigational art of the Russian Navy will pass into good young hands. I ask everyone to use the method used by Hirvonen as often as possible, because further on we will go, if I may say so, quite remote places. Many capes and even bays have no names on the maps. Besides, discoveries are always pleasant to the one. Competition is not a competition, but there was some healthy excitement in the discovery of the unidentified. What Gedrimovich taught was useful to many in the sea life, especially those who served in the Pacific Fleet. Being there, the flagship navigator of the unit, I remembered with special gratitude the golden words of the old navigator and his excellent school, his passionate enthusiasm for his profession, and a great desire to pass on to the younger generation all the wealth of accumulated experience. We reached the Lofoten Islands. As in 1924, we saw that the sun did not want to go beyond the horizon. Instead of heading north, the ships began to sail in alternating courses almost in a circle. Why would they do that? Then the squadron headed north again. A short time later, Gedrimovich appeared. He looked at the nearest navigator's table and sadly remarked, "What a shame. How did I miss such an interesting thing? Tell me, Klevensky, why you have so many variable courses on your chart, and at what time of day these courses were made." Lenya thought about it. It happened when the sun was almost at the horizon. Each tack was 5 to 8 minutes, and on each tack on the bow bridge they were bearing the sun. That's just superb. It's nice to know you're observant. Question: why was all this done? Why were the ships doing this sort of a quadrille? We're all wondering, but we're not in a hurry to answer. We don't want to get into trouble. See, in my opinion, the navigator's dance was necessary to determine the compass correction. Hirvonen said with some uncertainty. Navigational dance, well done, Hirvonen. Once again, I am convinced that you should be a navigator, and perhaps a good one. It is a pity that I was not warned, and you and I did not determine the compass correction we are working with. Gedrimovich gave us a detailed account of all possible ways of determining compass corrections in sailing. To the expression navigator's dance became common. I don't know how it is now, but before the 60s I heard such a term in the fleet. The weather favoured us and displeased us. Sailing in a storm on the Komsomolets is not pleasant at all, and on the Aurora, where everything is subordinated to the weapon, and everything else is extremely compressed and cramped, it is very bad. One bad weather day, Frolov announces. Andrei, from 0 to 4, you're on watch in the stoker's room. It seems to be your favourite watch, he teased. Indeed, I love machines. Watch at the machines I carry with pleasure. In the boiler room to the cadet boiler were all four appointed. The ship is rocking thoroughly. Roll more than 15 degrees. It is difficult to stand on the deck at the boilers. The foreman of the watch looked us over carefully, left 3 of us at the boiler and sent me, as the weakest, to shive at coal from the suspended coal pit in the lower one. I climbed into the hanging pit. It's hot. I couldn't breathe. The coal is dry. If you touch it with a shovel, you can't see anything. I started throwing coal with a shovel into the neck. I was naked from the waist down, covered with coal dust, and there were dirty stains all over my body from sweat. I decided to take a little rest. At the same time, they started banging with a crowbar from below. They demanded to mop faster. I worked for almost an hour by feel, and from below they keep demanding coal. I even got angry. What am I, a slacker or what? With anger, I put the shovel in, picked up a full of coal, took a step, fell down the throat. I fell on a heap of coal, on which I rolled down to the hatch to the stoker's room. I can't get up. I've had a good bump. "Welcome home," said the petty officer venomously, looking through the hatch into the pit. "How did it arrive?" The dust had settled a little. The petty officer looked over the pit and, having made sure that I flew from 3 meters, shook his head. I could hardly get out. I couldn't straighten up. I had abrasions on my arms. I must have looked good. Saint Simti, the apparition of Saint Vladimir, Yui Fyodor Kanyov quips. His mother wouldn't even recognize him. No, Saint Vladimir let him sit for a while. And you nattering bastard, get into the hanging room. Leave your shovel here, and you will find his shovel in the pit, ordered the foreman. And immediately he himself got entangled in the snare. Boris Nevishin, the forward of the college soccer team, the storm of goalkeepers, quoted with a chuckle, looking at Fyodor. After a while, seeing that the guys left at the boiler are sewing up, the foreman of the watch handed me Fedor's shovel. Everything is clear. It's time to work. The stoker's room is cramped. It's not Komsomolets. Boilers along the diametrical plane. So when you take a shovel of coal to throw into the furnace, don't yawn, or you'll hit the hot door. If you swing to the other side, you will fly away from the furnace. One torment. Gradually, we managed to adapt. It seems that the training on the Komsomolets was not in vain. We were desperately exhausted during the watch. We got incredibly dirty in coal dust. We could hardly wash ourselves in the bathhouse. The only joy was that we washed with fresh water. This advantage was used on the cruiser only by the engine crew. Once in the engine room, I, as a newbie, was sent to keep watch in the corridor shaft. The matter is simply, make sure that the support bearings do not get warm. But the conditions there are the most unfavorable. I briskly went into the corridor. I thought it would be like on Komsomolets, the corridor is spacious. But here you can fit only bent in half. 0% oxygen, but 100% dampness, plus engine oil fumes. On the ocean's quicksand, the ship would rise to great heights and then be tossed down like the underworld. This keel rocking exhausted me. It didn't take an hour. I did not walk, but crawled, groping the bearings. Unfortunately for me, one of them was getting hotter and hotter. No matter how hard I tried, it kept getting hotter and hotter. I had to climb into the engine room to report. Holding on to everything that doesn't spin, I managed to get to the nozzle. What a blessing it is. Fresh air. The ship's spirits alone know its real value. "How did you get out of the corridor?" the petty officer asks me sternly. "The bearing." "What bearing?" "Why didn't you, your empty head, report it at once? Vanya, cop to the corridor and take this jellyfish with you and tell him the rules of behavior in special circumstances." The most annoying thing was that I was a jellyfish. You can take it all, but you can't take jellyfish. If it gets out to the guys, I'll be dead. "So did the foreman wash you? Get in quickly. Show me the bearing." Unceremoniously pushing me lower back, shouted the watch bilge officer. "Like a cat, in 2 jumps. Otherwise we may be late. We have reached the unfortunate bearing, and we can't touch it." With lightning speed, Ivan unscrewed the copper tubes that supplied water for cooling. With a piece of rag on a wire as a rough, cleaned them and the top cover of the bearing. Ivan's hands are like a magician's. You can't keep an eye on them. We let in more water for cooling. We feel the bearing. It is not getting hotter. It seems to be even colder. In about 12 to 15 minutes, Ivan touched the bearing again. "That's all right. If we had been a little late, we would have been in trouble. You'd get a lip and Seriosha, the petty officer, even worse. Wow, that's what real sailors do. Whether you get seasick or not, it's a matter of cars first." And you hurriedly went under the fan nozzle. Forgot about the case, forgot to report about the malfunctions in the part of the machine entrusted to you. Now part of the machine, and then the whole ship, all the people will be entrusted to you. For a long time my ears were burning, and Ivan kept telling me off, teaching me the rules of sea life on a warship. It was embarrassing, words can't describe it. I do not know why, either because of the delicacy of the drivers or for some other reason, but the incident was not publicized, and I was worried about it during the whole trip. I had to carry the next watch in the same shift. Gradually I gained confidence. The unsuccessful corridor man was promoted. Look where he's gone. Up to the indicator platform. This is the very platform, hotter than which there is no place in the car. It was my second endurance test. The temperature is exactly sitting inside the steam cylinder of the machine. You are given a solid-sized oil can with soapy water and a liter syringe, from which you should periodically water vertically sliding and rubbing parts located under the 3 steam cylinders. Later I was even allowed to go to the place where steam energy is transformed into motion, where connecting rods and moths work so industriously and harmoniously, where a crankshaft is turned with diligence, like Hercules' hands, and a propeller rotates at the end of which, screwed into the water. During the work we did not notice how we approached Murmansk. Keeping the course to Archangelsk, in its waters the squadron went no further than 2-3 miles from the coastline. If Gedrimovich had not taught us earlier, we would have had a hard time in navigational maps. That's when most of determinations of places in the sea were made not by beacons and signs, but by capes, conspicuous places and peaks. The log was read to death, and the weather, as if mocking every now and then threw charges, covering all the peaks from you'd have to guess them, find them. A cloud would open its cunning eye for a moment, and only you would start to distinguish something, and it would close its eyelids tightly again, lowering like eyelashes strips of fog. Gedrimovich walks and breaks us, demands that we think faster and work faster at the direction finder. He talked about something with Hervonen. He went down to the cockpit, brought from there a notebook the size of an unfolded sheet, and under the guidance of Gedrimovich began to draw something, looking at the shore, curious. It turns out that together with Gedrimovich they drew notable places on the shore, which we passed by and saw from different angles. Gedrimovich, satisfied, praised Hervonen. He was really good at it. The shore and its depth were depicted in relief. Gradually, we all huddled around Hervonen's table. Well, young people, do you recognize what is depicted? We do. I will allow myself to say that what you see in Hervonen's notebook is not only curious, but also extremely useful in navigating. I told you about the strategic fairway in the Finnish skerries. So on this fairway during the war, the warships navigated exclusively on the basis of such sketches. I am deeply convinced of their usefulness. And now I ask you to make sketches while on navigator's watch. No special artistry is required here. Do it as you know how. Develop your eyesight and observation. It will be very useful for you in the sea life. In Archangelsk, on the occasion of the arrival of the detachment, were announced folk festivities, sports competitions, amateur art concert. We had not yet got off the ship, but already felt the atmosphere of cordiality. The feeling of joy of meeting, hospitality filled everything around. Well done, Archangelsk citizens, they greeted us in Russian from the bottom of their hearts. She went ashore and immediately got into the friendly embrace of Archangelsk Komsomol members. We found a lot of old acquaintances from last year's meeting, and then it turned out that the quietest and most modest, Gerasimov, was met by a girl who could not be called other than a northern beauty. What a thing! Archangelsk citizens proposed the following program. A tour of the city, 2 hours, lunch break, an hour, competitions on the water, swimming at 1,000 meters, jumping from a 10-meter tower, rowing races. Nikolai Bogdanov proposed to include in the program and the most difficult sea sport, tug of war. Accepted. Laughingly agreed organizers. For amateurs there is town games. Half an hour after the end of the sports part, amateur art concert. That we would have to take part in rowing races. We assumed that, but to jump from a 10-meter tower and swim 1,000 meters on the river, no one expected such a thing. All hope was on Brunovitsky, Kuznetsov, Karatayev and Eagle. The competition began with diving, first with a small springboard, then with a 5-meter tower. A dozen or two jumpers took part, almost half hours. There were all sorts of things. One would enter the water like a knife, The other would plunge in such a way that one could wonder how he got out of the water alive. Each side cheered their own. The fight was almost on an equal footing, but still ours jumped better. Passion was building. And finally, the last one, a jump from 10 meters. Archangel's guys started. They were doing well, especially one, red-haired. It was Boris Karatai's turn. We all froze, because he had never jumped from a 10-meter tower and only under our pressure agreed to perform. Boris stood up, frozen on the tower. It seemed that he was preparing for the jump for too long. Finally, his figure separated from the tower and, spreading out like a swallow, rushed down, and then stretching out like a sword thrust into the water surface. What a jump! We jumped up from our seats, waving our caps, shout, "Well done, Borja!" Well, the audience applauded. A clear victory. Karatayev had been the first before in other types of jumps. The evening in the park went on as usual. Sang on the bandstand. The audience sang, danced. The amateur performances were changing. Jokes, laughter, but here came the horn of the Toiler hydrograph. It's time. Archangel's citizens saw us off to the pier. In the morning we had to fulfill the task of astronomical practice, to determine the place of the cruiser's anchorage by astronomical method and compare it with the absolutely exact place obtained by bearing to the lighthouse and distance measured by the rangefinder. Of course, this should have been done earlier, but when? Here and dismissals to Archangelsk, and co-loading, and ship's work, and watches, true. Our astronomy teacher, Alexeyev, told us more than one. A decent navigator will always have time to determine the ship's position at sea. And who would want to be a bad navigator? How much patience and pedagogical tact Alexeyev needed to teach us during summer practice to use sextant, star globe to catch the sun, which for some reason in the sextant tube stubbornly did not want to descend from its heights to the visible horizon. Back in the school, reading the theoretical course of astronomy, the most obscure for our youthful heads of science, Alexeyev, with the greatest patience and enviable persistence, told us, all together and each separately, the laws of celestial mechanics, mathematical methods of determining the place of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, in which, in truth, without his pastoral hand we would be, given the greatest confusion of the starry sky, century not to understand. We respected him for his benevolence, for his sincerity, for his desire to teach us wisdom. But we did not consider it a sin to take advantage of his kindness and gentleness. We had a different relationship with Bespiatov. He had to pass the credits several times, until he was convinced of a solid knowledge of the subject. At first it seemed to us that Bespiatov, an adherent of the old system, was deliberately picking on the Red Fleet cadets, mocking our illiteracy. Later the guys noticed that when they answered well, Bespiatov's eyes warmed. It used to be so. Whoever did not know the subject well did not go to the test. They were ashamed in front of the old man. Bespiatov was an authoritative and respected man in the school. He lived only his interests. Even Bespiatov's apartment was in a neighboring, adjacent to the building of the school. Great thanks to teachers B.A., Alexeyev, M.M. Bespiatov, and many others, who made us people versed in nautical sciences. Almost daily trainings, especially when carrying the navigational watch, did their job. With the sun we learned to manage with a clear horizon, and a small rocking quite tolerably well, in our opinion, with an error within 3 EE5 miles. But even now there were curiosities. More often than others, they happened with Volodya Pereligin, who was not very keen on astronomy. Hirvonen, Soloviev, Ladinsky were always held up as examples. Alexeyev's assignment we fulfilled with half a sin. Many of us didn't go beyond 3 miles. Our astronomers entered the 2-mile zone, and Hirvonen hit the bull's eye. Even Alexeyev, who is not very generous with praise, summarized the results and she is phenomenal, but you can't go against the fact. Hirvonen fulfilled the task brilliantly. Very glad, very glad. Bryandinsky drew a cartoon our astronomers in the wall newspaper. Pereligin was depicted sitting on a lighthouse. Hirvonen proudly towered on the bridge of the cruiser. Having exchanged farewell signals with our northern companion, hydrographer, the detachment dropped anchor. We were on our way to the Arctic Ocean, which for the time of our absence had become drier, breathed cold winds, began to rush on the ship's boards with crests of waves. Back in the White Sea, Jedrimovich, and especially Alexeyev, began to call us more often for astronomical observations, demanding the solution of more and more problems. Any attempts to even hint that the weather was interfering were adamantly rejected. The sea is not a parquet hall. To be able to work in difficult conditions means to be able to work in any conditions. In war, the most favorable weather is bad weather that makes it difficult for the enemy. The detachment marched out of sight of the coast. Nothing but astronomy could determine its place in the ocean. Maybe that's why everyone, without knowing fatigue, took heights, worked with the almanac, with nautical tables, and diligently solved the riddle. Where are we sailing in the ocean? One day the detachment turned sharply almost to the Zuid, to the shore. We were brought new maps of the northern part of the Norwegian fjords. Jedrimovich appeared. In order to shorten the distance and save coal, the detachment will go part of the way by fjords. In addition to everything previously said, I ask you to make sketches of notable places of the ship's fairway. I recommend to address us at any time. I emphasize at any time, in case of any unsolvable questions at cadet debates. A gesture towards Alexeyev and Nikanor Ignatievich standing next to him. Of course, these navigational sketches looked like children's drawings to many people. Those who had done well before and the artists of the wall newspaper Obukhov, Solovyev, Romanov distinguished themselves. Our navigational gods changed from anger to mercy. Jedrimovich took Solovyev's work and began to look at it with some special affectionate attention, then showed it to us and with great warmth. Here is a work that has brought me comfort and genuine joy. I set it as an example to everyone. The day before coming to Bergen on the Aurora, all those free from watch were gathered at the longitudinal bridge, from which the commissar of the ship announced, "We'll be in Bergen soon. Most of us are familiar with him from the last voyage. How to behave I will not repeat. You know yourself. But there's something new. In Bergen is a detachment of American destroyers. We'll be close to each other on the roadstead. Our ship's discipline, culture, appearance and behavior of sailors on shore will be compared and evaluated. There may be provocations. Do not give in to them. The commander and I recommend spending time ashore in groups of 3, preferably 5. Remember the honor of the Red Fleet flag? The crew's been disbanded. All we talk about everywhere is the Americans. What kind of ships do they have? What kind of people are they? In general, the international theme has taken over everyone. On the occasion of the international review, the already clean Aurora was cleaned up like a bride for a wedding. The upper deck was cleaned with sand for the second time, crawling on their knees. They worked up to their 7th sweat, cheering themselves up with jokes. By the appointed date, everything was done in Ajura, as the chief bosun of the cruiser liked to say. Tidy and well-groomed, the Aurora was really good. Bergen welcomed us as old acquaintances joyfully. After all the official ceremonies, we began to look curiously at the 4-tube American destroyers. Their appearance, with the exception of more oval bow outlines, was far inferior to our ship, but the fact that each destroyer had motorboats, clearly everyone liked it. We even on the cruiser motorboats at that time did not have. In addition to us and the Americans on the roadstead, far from our ships, stood the French gunboat Anchor. At shore leave, almost every member of the previous year's campaign met acquaintances. There was no aloofness and wariness. Even shy Freckens boldly greeted our brother. This time there were Norwegian boys. It was impossible to squeeze through. They surrounded us, grabbed our hands, tried to drag us somewhere, saw us off in a bunch, and said something fervently. On the shore we met Americans. As a rule, the guys are tall. The uniform is not devoid of elegance. Especially interesting were pants cleche, which did not have a single button, and at the hips laced up, so that when falling into the water they could be quickly removed. The headdress was a white Panama with vertically raised stiff fields. The Americans were no strangers to getting acquainted with us, but when their patrol armed with rubber truncheons appeared, they were completely alienated. With the French, despite the prohibition of their superiors, we had the most friendly relations. Camarade was the word that brought us together. Often a friendly pat on the shoulder was reinforced by a small bottle of Norwegian beer. Greedy inquiries about the life of the country of workers and peasants. Pretty guys. French sailors in their languid blue berets with coquettish pompons. They were struck by the simplicity of relations on our ships between officers, as they said, and subordinates. They were openly jealous of the goodness of our uniforms. We inquired why their gunboat was standing on the outskirts, far away from our ships. From the heated speeches of the French fellows, we realized that their commander, afraid of our red influence, even wanted to leave the roadstead. He did not leave, but forbade the crew of the gunboat to communicate with the red sailors. According to tradition, one of the days for our squadron were scheduled rowing races. We're trying. We ourselves feel, We row all as one person. Our boat has already pulled ahead by 4 hulls. Suddenly we hear from the American destroyer sailors something shouting and whistling. They are booing us, the prize fighters. That's the last thing we need. They're all angry. Now we'll show you how to do I. The second destroyer whistles even more shrilly. Eagles, keep your noses up. Rowing, it can't be better. Encourages us boat commander grits. We won the race. The Americans were angry to the limit. We left only much later when we learned that the Americans whistle, a sign of approval. That's how it happens. During the last campaign in Trondheim, local communists organized an evening of Boeing with the crews of Soviet ships. That was a memory. Now the Bergenians offered to hold a farewell party in the biggest working club. We, of course, agreed. The atmosphere of true friendship was immediately established in the club. We sang Russian songs that the Norwegians liked. In the resulting circle, dancing. In a word, the young people partied, cheered up. Mikhail Ryazanov, standing at the open window, saw a small group of Frenchmen in the street. "Nos camarades." He waved his hand at them, gesturing to invite them to the club. The owners did not object to the appearance of the Frenchmen. "No, guys, let's do Yabloko." We began to hum the motif, clapping our hands. Kukarenko came out into the circle, then Pirogin, Umovsky, and others followed them. The real Navy Yabloko began spontaneously. How could the walls hold out? To our Yabloko, even the French soloed a tap dance. Laughter, applause. From all sides is heard "Camarade, tu vas riche." "Guys, we're internationalists. Let's invite the Americans too," someone suggested. But to our surprise, when we heard about the Americans, the Norwegians strongly objected. No amount of persuasion helped. The evening ended with the singing of the International. It seems that the whole of Bergen poured into the streets, on the quays, seeing off the ships of our detachment. A whole flotilla of fishing, pleasure, sports motorboats accompanied us for a long time. Earlier we didn't count how many days were left till our return to Kronstadt. Now it was not uncommon to hear. "Now, Flagstaff, how many days after your watch we still have to schlep to the fortress created by Peter?" "Obviously, as long as we pass," we answered Sasha with a nonchalant look. Much later we learned that among the sailors of different countries there is an omen. Those who go to sea do not ask when they will return. In the era of rowing and sailing fleet, the existence of such a belief was understandable. And what about in the fleet of the XX century? We no longer openly inquired about return dates, unless, as if by chance with a circular measuring device, you measure the remaining distance to Kronstadt on the general map. Divide the sum of miles by the average hourly course of the ship, and multiply the result by 24. You measure it yourself, divide it yourself, and count it yourself. Together with signalmen, we are on watch on the move. The weather is rough, ripples. To look at such waves for a long time, you have to get used to it. And when you look through binoculars, when the horizon is swaying like a man in a strong hop, it's not good at all. There's a 45 on the left, smoke, reports to the watch commander the signalman's foreman. I look there, I don't see any smoke. I ask the foreman. He shows his hand. No matter how much I look at the horizon, I see nothing but torn grey clouds. Finally, in one place I saw something black and red. It was smoke. "Hey, signal officer, why don't you report about a floating object on the right 10, distance 7 cable meters?" Comes the menacing voice of the watch commander. "Yes, report. What an eye. He's seen us again. Your sector is 45 to 90 degrees starboard. Keep your eyes open so you can spot a splinter. It's better to report any garbage than to miss something," the signalman instructed me. About everything noticed on the surface of the water from the signal bridge reports were sent to the running bridge. "Mine heading, port side 5, distance 5 cable meters," shouted the signalman of the port. "Raise area Zuid, Pokoi to the place. Starboard, sound the siren," commands the watch commander. The ship began to go sharply to the right. Alarmingly, intermittently the siren blared. Polinov jumped out of the navigator's cabin onto the bridge. The ships, having performed the coordinate, separated from the mine, which turned out to be some harmless object of spherical shape. On the signal came the commander's voice. "I approve of your service. Continue in the same spirit. Don't miss a real mine. Anything can happen here. In the war in this area of the North Sea, they put them by the thousands. The mine incident got everyone excited. The magicians were looked upon with respect. Even the spirits recognized the importance of the service. which even in peacetime can save the ship from destruction. We're sailing the North Sea. We are sailing in the North Sea, and on top of that it is also Rasmukropogoditalo, a downpour no horizon for astronomical observations, and the shore has long since disappeared. All those who were free from watch and classes laid down on the deck chairs. Quiet conversations were going on. Some were reading, preferring books, very far from mathematical formulas. At this time and came to us the commander of the ship, Pole. He ordered to invite cadets from the neighbouring cubicle. When all gathered, the commander began a heart-to-heart talk. I was told that the mine accident, which we all witnessed recently, caused a lively debate in your environment. There were questions. How to be at night, how to avoid danger even in peaceful, non-military conditions. Your concern pleases me. Worried means you are thinking, thinking means you are looking for an answer, for a solution. Not inertia, but search owns you. That's right. Only search moves science forward, including marine science. Let's hope that from your environment seekers will do a lot of useful things for the fleet. We engage you to carry the watch of signalers, not only to make you proficient in the transmission of semaphores, flag signals in the work of the clotique. All this, of course, must be done by the watch commander, not worse, but certainly better than the signalers themselves. But the main thing is that we want to teach you to observe the water surface at sea. In the very near future, observation of the air and underwater will, in my deep conviction, become no less important. Observation is, if you like, an art, and like any art, it requires endless improvement and therefore the hardest labour. On the water, one must be able to see, and see far, even a splinter. Otherwise, there can be the most serious consequences, up to the loss of life and ship. Your naval history teacher obviously told you about the sinking of 3 British cruisers by a German submarine in the last war, and it all happened because one of the watchstanders on British ships mistook the submarine's periscope for some innocuous object, maybe even a tin can. He failed to notice that the water does not ripple, but flows around this tin can, while the empty tin can itself should be dangling in the water like a float. That's the point. The point is the subtlety of observation. Every skill takes time and practice to achieve and perfect. Make a rule for yourself. Whatever you do, always watch the sea. See, the time is not far when you, after graduating from the school, will be produced in the watch chiefs. Hurry up, someone sighed. Don't hurry, I assure you. The remaining time will pass without you noticing. It's the main thing that I wanted to tell you before soon entering the Baltic Straits. On every ship, its commander, supervisors who are on watch, are obliged to see and hear at sea earlier and better than the persons of the surveillance service. Only under this condition it is possible to be sure that the ship is in reliable commander's hands. I recommend you to remember it firmly. I wish you success in mastering the laws of naval service. Stand at attention. The command sounded after the cruiser commander leaving for the bridge. We respected Polanov, but we were also afraid of him. In our eyes, he was the embodiment of a real commander of a warship. We absorbed everything he said without a trace and did not question it. Now, many years later, with the experience of naval service, I can confirm the fairness of the instructions of the commander of the Aurora. See, the squadron goes forward. The bad weather is behind us. The Baltic Sea met us with a ruddy morning, a light breeze. But Gedramovich and Alexiv gave us a truly astronomical and navigational marathon. Freeing us from all other affairs and duty observation was a task, and so on without end. When we went near the eastern shore of the sea, there was only one requirement. Where are we? What are we passing by? In this case, be sure to give a full characterization, not less than in the logbook. We entered the Gulf of Finland. Here the astronomical marathon finished, and the navigational one became even more difficult. Exactly. The closer to home, the more difficult. Maggie demanded from us the most detailed knowledge of the islands, lighthouses and signs, their characteristics. By heart, the description of the sea bottom with numerous banks was asked from us as if we had walked on it and seen everything. The last at Seska Island, they announce. The navigator's watch is closed. Finish, hooray. Perhaps it was a bit early to shout hooray. After all, we hadn't been graded yet. Everyone wanted to know what his results were. Only now we realized that the Magi were racing us in a marathon to finally test our knowledge in nautical sciences. Well, we'll live and see. It was not long to wait. Meanwhile, after passing Seska, the squadron has slowed down. Why would they do that? Closer to us, towards the Kopor Bay, a tugboat was pulling a large ship's shield. Much to the left we could see the huge whirlwinds of 2 destroyers. Almost half of the crew was gathered on the cruiser's tank. All of them were watching with interest. "Now they're going to fire," murmured someone, apparently from the commanders. First gun flashes flashed, and then came the sound of gunfire. In a few seconds, 2 water sultans rose on either side of the shield. More flashes and the sound of gunfire. Again, same pattern. Flashes, volleys, flashes, volleys. "We're on the point of defeat," someone said knowingly. Sometimes the shield was not visible at all behind the water sultans. The columns of water moving a little behind the shield, then in front of it, covered it with their splashes. "Here they give me a light," repeated with admiration the gunnery foreman, whose calculation included the cadet. "The spectacle is exciting, but it is short, just a few minutes, and the firing stopped. For us the event was exceptional. We saw the first artillery attack of our remarkable destroyers. Indelible for life, the impression, a wonderful end to our summer practice." Summer practice in 1925 ended with the traditional general school races on the small and eastern Kronstadt raids. We competed on boats, paddle boats and 6-hour yawls. To the honour of the former Preparilites, a good half of the prizes remained for them. Our boat took first place. Each of us was given a token in the form of a life preserver with crossed oars, and the Roman new race under sail won the boat, on which the petty officer had the honour to be writing these lines. The prize, a breast badge in the form of a dark blue enamel shield with an applied gold 6 and cut folk, was especially beautiful. While on leave, we wore these badges of naval valour on our flannels with special pride. We did not boast, but we did not refuse to tell in what hot fights they were obtained. Listening to us, guys hummed, girls admired, and we sincerely regretted that Volodya Perilichin was not with us and would not be. That's who would have told us. We ourselves would not have made out what was and what was not. We returned from vacation to Leningrad. The school is still there. Everything is the same. But there's more cadets and more people in the school. What does that mean? It turned out that the Naval Preparatory School was disbanded. Its graduates were transferred to higher schools, including ours. Our school had been producing general officers of the watch. Each graduate could be assigned to a ship as a navigator, artilleryman, torpedoist miner, and even an auditor, simply put, an economic manager. On this basis, the whole course of training was built. Mathematical training, marine science, marine practice. The second year, continuation of marine science, basic study of weapons in winter, in school in summer, on warships, in arsenals, with practical application of weapons. The third year, marine science, basic training in artillery and torpedo firing, state examination. In the summer as ship cadets, practice on warships, in command positions. Then graduation on the basis of grades of the state exam and the command of the ships for practice. Such a system, not without its logic, was in the old Navy. It remained until the early 30s. Everything began with chemistry, with its theoretical part. The teacher Abramov, a chemical engineer, read his subject masterfully, illustrating his lectures with witty examples. We respected Abramov very much, marvelled at his fluency in the material, and yet, except for Volkov, Romanovsky, Afinogenov and Alfarov, who had enough imagination to see all these molecules, most of us, frankly speaking, chemistry was crammed. Chemistry was crammed to the point of mindlessness. If Abramov was a very demanding teacher, then Vorozakin, a famous man in the world of chemists, did not let us down at all. We passed the credits to him many times until he was convinced that the cadets' knowledge was solid. Vorozakin and Abramov still made us learn chemistry, and we were able to start practical work. Chemical laboratory, as well as the physics room, in the school was equipped perfectly. Working tables, cabinets, shelves, fume cupboards, all made of clean, without knots, light birch. The stools for students are also made of birch, with cone-shaped massive legs, on which are small, with a recess to make it more comfortable to sit, a massive cover painted with black lacquer. It's a pity they don't make these now. Our practical works were more to our liking. After one of them, Abramov said, "With the theory you have swam free swimming. Well, it's not bad. You and I have learned to make gunpowder, though, in minuscule quantities, but still gunpowder explosives. The smallest thing left is the fuse, or rather, its primer, or as they call it in common parlance, the piston. Now we will try to get rattling mercury." Abramov showed us how to do it, and asked Volkov and Tarev to repeat the operation themselves. While Abramov, having gone to a far corner, was doing something, the guys managed to double the volume and weight of the components. The resulting P was placed on the anvil, and Volkov banged on it with a hammer. Broken chemical test tubes rang. One glass in the fume cupboard. Congratulations on graduating chemistry class. It's business as usual. Abramov's eyes are laughing. So the laboratory assistant, picking up the broken glass, grumbles. Every time on this very spot, you just have time to prepare dishes. That was the end of our chemical education. We started studying artillery, torpedo and mine weapons. The artillery class was taught by Shane. For this man in love with his work, artillery really was the god of war. He was sincerely convinced that there was nothing more important than artillery in the fleet. Calibers, penetration, range, rate of fire, weight of shells, powder charges amazed us. Everyone was fascinated by artillery. In the artillery room, there were artillery installations up to 120 millimeters. As for larger calibers, they were studied only by perfectly executed drawings. If we had not had the chief laboratory technicians in the office, avid commanders, we would not have been able to study artillery properly. Shane often recommended that we go to them in case of difficulties. He kept telling, "When you come to the ships, don't hesitate to learn from the senior enlisted men. They have a wealth of experience. In general, young people, you will be commanders. Do not boast. Do not trump your knowledge. The main thing, do not hurry to use the power given to you. Be sparing on penalties, and be attentive to the efforts of subordinates. As you see, I am already bold. Believe me, not assert yourself by the power given to you, but make your subordinates recognize you as a commander. It's a great thing when your subordinates believe in you. In artillery, seconds decide everything. You understand the importance of mutual trust, and I would say respect in these conditions. Artillery service requires the greatest order and discipline in everything, and they start from the head, from the commander, that is, from you. Learn to be taut and neat in everything. Artillery we studied diligently and knew it, as Shane said, suitably. Suddenly, Swikovsky began to teach us mine weapons. He knew the subject perfectly. In the First World War, Swikovsky was a senior officer on one of the cruisers, which put mines off the coast of Germany, almost in the Bay of Kiel, which caused significant damage to the enemy and forced him to get involved in extensive and expensive trawling operations. The new meeting was mutually pleasant. Swikovsky, seeing familiar faces, even felt sorry for them. How they have grown up? You bet. 2 years is a long time. After a short pause, Swikovsky began his first lecture like this. The Russian Navy in the development and use of mine weapons has always been ahead of other fleets. It is enough to refer to the events and experience of the past war in the Baltic. We began to study the then in-service mines of 1908 and 1912, ingenuous in design, but impressive in destructive power. Torpedo weapons we were engaged under the guidance of Dobrovolsky, a pupil of L.G. Goncharov himself, a professor of the Naval Academy, the most authoritative scientist in the Navy in the field of the development of warfare at sea and means of combating them. Dobrovolsky took on himself all the issues related to the history of development and theory of torpedo weapons. The study of the material part of torpedoes and torpedo apparatuses went under the guidance of laboratory technician Osipov, and more simply, Uncle Yasha, the true god of torpedo making. The torpedo with its machine and all the facilities associated with movement in the water environment, a witty system of control of vertical and horizontal rudders simply bewitched me. This is not an artillery shell, flew out of the barrel and flies on a torpedo like a living creature. Itself keeps the direction in 2 dimensions and carries a charge of more than 100 kilograms. In our class, as well as in the whole course, there were heated debates. We argued about the advantages of artillery and torpedoes. Artillery, of course, is a reliable weapon, but it is necessary to build battleships for it, but torpedoes can be fired from any boat. Airplanes can throw bombs, but why can't they throw torpedoes? Alfarov said dreamily. Volodya was a famous fantasist. Then he had X-rays, and now he was going to throw torpedoes from airplanes. But arguments are arguments, and how to decide who to be. That was the burning question of questions that confronted us